Hello and welcome to this episode of the iDeas podcast. This is a really exciting one because it's a little bit different. We're very used to having instructional designers and L&D coordinators, L&D managers here with us on the show. But for this episode, we have the wonderful Mr. Christopher Tester, who is a voiceover artist. So this is a kind of an addition to the e-learning world that I think we're seeing. It's been part of the e-learning world for a long time, but I think we're seeing it really grow and people sort of identify the value in this space. So thank you so much for making the time to come on the show. And I'll
not at all, my pleasure.
Thank you. I'll hand over to you for a proper introduction after my vain attempt.
No, not at all. No, thank you so much. So I originally trained as well. I originally went to Warwick University and read English and theatre studies, and had vague ideas of potentially becoming a journalist or working in some vein like that. But then I kind of was bitten by the acting bug. So after graduating from Warwick, then decided to train for another 3 years as an actor. So that was in London. And then, yes, I've been working as an actor since 2008 when I graduated originally. And then been doing bits and pieces of voiceover here and there, as jobbing actors tend to do. Don't know how familiar you are with Stephen Toast, Toast of London, but that kind of thing. Thankfully, haven't had too many real-life Clem Fandango moments, shall we say. But I've had a few. And then really around about 2016, 2017, there was a kind of a bit of a sea change in my career, which was, I was getting that little bit older, and therefore the novelty of living and dying for your art and being absolutely penniless was starting to lose its appeal somewhat, slightly. That combined with my agent at the time, my acting agent at the time actually passed away, and I was in the process of kind of helping to set up my own theatre company. So that kind of like meant that my focus became, rather than climbing up the slippery pole of getting in with the right people and getting to the right theatres and all of this kind of thing, my focus became much more about producing work that I was passionate about and ways of facilitating that, and also kind of getting into voiceover more independently, rather than being like phoning up my voice agent and going, have you got anything for me? Because I didn't have a voice agent, so that wouldn't have gone very far. So it was about 2016 that I started recording from home. And on my website, there's a kind of like a blog post that I put up there in 2016 of what my first home, quote unquote, studio was, which was basically some sound treatment from a duvet, my duvet, I hasten to add, not someone else's, my duvet that I had kind of like rigged up behind me using an oar that my flatmate at the time had stolen on a drunken night out. So that was my home setup, and I did a very nice first narration for a Dutch architect using that setup, and actually got paid money for it, and thought, okay, maybe this might be a viable way of actually, starting a business. And then it's really kind of escalated very quickly from then, because of a lot of the differences in kind of operating myself as a freelancer and as a business person to a certain degree, as opposed to solely a creative, where the battle for your control and your own trajectory is a lot tougher in many kind of ways. So I've been kind of full-time really since 2016. It has facilitated me being able to kind of like work and do stuff on my theatre when possible, which is what I am incredibly passionate about. But I am also passionate about voiceover, because I think it's the difference between good voiceover and bad voiceover is hugely significant. I mean, I first got into voiceover really because of video games. Just as like I can remember the impact on me of some amazing acting in video games that has really kind of heightened that whole craft, I've also encountered my fair share of really bad, which completely breaks immersion and therefore emotional connection and attention. And all of those things I feel kind of like apply to when I do work in e-learning or in corporate or B2B. They're all essentially the same things. You're talking about who you are, who you're talking to, what it is that you want them to do, or what it is that you want them to understand. And as with anything, really, a kind of rule one of drama school and my drama training is that if you use the same tactic or the same nice voice, quote unquote, or anything else like that, people get bored really, really quickly. They get disengaged. Like, I know what it is now. You know, the same rhythms get followed, and all of that, all of that happens, and as a result, what may be incredibly valuable content or a really fantastic resource for people kind of goes by the wayside. So my interest has been always in trying to kind of blur the lines as much as possible between the actor's toolkit that I was given at drama school, which did include an entire term pretending to be a bat. And then the kind of the more corporate side of work that I do, as well as the learning side. I come from a family of teachers. Both my parents were teachers. So I suppose there's that interest and element that I have as well. So that's probably a really long, rambling monologue about as an introduction of who I am anyway.
No, that's really good. I always say on the show, it's so interesting when you ask people to introduce themselves, because some people give you like their current job description. You have to really kind of like, okay, let's dig deeper than your current professional role, shall we? But I think it's fascinating to hear how very few people who are in any kind of job now where we're coming on this show and we're chatting about it, were going, that's where I'm going to be. No one says, at 8 years old, I went, that is the career I want. I want to be a voiceover artist or an instructional. Certainly no one says instructional designer, because at 8 years old, who knows what an instructional designer is?
Well, I mean, there is that. Yeah, true.
There are plenty of us in the field that still can't quite define what the job role is. But it was really interesting to hear that kind of link from acting into voice acting.
Yeah, sure.
Because I always remember watching a very brief kind of clip with Mark Hamill making kind of a similar kind of point about, why would you go and do voice acting? You're such an amazing actor, as if it's almost referred to as like a lesser craft.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But I feel like that's changed. Or certainly I think the perception of it is changed maybe in the broader public.
I think there are a number of reasons for that. Definitely, I think it's the greater acceptance is partly because of the change of forms. I mean, we were saying before in terms of like people our age kind of grew up with animation and sometimes quite adult animation as well. So it's not thought of, that type of voicing isn't thought of as for children and, the kids of today, my God, whatever they're watching. I mean, so many of them want to be, they're all kind of very interested in, the manga and the anime and all of this kind of thing. And you actually look at the content of this and the issues that they're dealing with most of the time, and they're pretty serious and they're pretty full on, even though the characters may still be incredibly extreme. Yeah. So there is that. I think, excuse me, there is an aspect of which, like, obviously for an actor, proportionately speaking, voiceover work is incredibly well paid compared to a lot of other acting work, certainly in terms of theatre stuff, and so therefore, because it's so comparatively undemanding in that you don't need to learn the lines, darling, and it also is disproportionately rewarding in comparison. It's therefore seen as a bit of a light touch. And I think there was a time as well, and there still is, where the various knights of the realm or whatever, who are kind of like called into a studio to add a certain level of gravitas to a particular project or game or narration or whatever, and they don't give a toss essentially about what it is that they're doing, but that they'll just kind of happy to kind of like warble through it, and it gets that seal of approval because a reputation, a big name has been attached. But increasingly, there's a growing, I think also a growth of the kind of behind the scenes element to it as well. So as soon as you see the great animation and cartoon voices, or the great narrators, kind of doing the work and finding out actually how demanding it can be, and the skill sets that it involves and the preparation involved and all of that kind of thing. It's been it's very much a career that is starting to properly be demystified, and it's obviously been exacerbated by COVID because I'd say probably the biggest change in the industry in the last 10 years has been the fact that home studios have become a really viable thing. Certainly when I started out and graduated from drama school, I didn't know that, having a home studio and voicing from home would ever be viable, because I thought you would need hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of equipment. Because when you did a voiceover, you went into a custom built studio in Soho, and it was all very otherworldly, that kind of thing. Whereas in actual fact, I voiced 99.99% of my work from this studio. As I said before, I didn't start with particularly, just the oar and the duvet, but even that worked to a solid extent and was only a couple of £100 in terms of an investment. So it doesn't take that much to actually get kind of started. It's kind of like providing that you know what you're doing and how you can manipulate the tech and all of that kind of thing. And that's the other kind of side of the gig, is that you really need to know your stuff about the technical side of things. And I have no interest in microphones, other than, is it on and can I be heard? Yeah. Or all of the technical things, or, to do with sound treatment and the different kind of like waves and resonances and what you need to be mindful of. And do you need bass traps and blah, 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 blah. I couldn't care less about any of these things, but I have to, because that's part of my job and it enables me to do what I do. And if that's, either self-recording stuff, and a lot of the e-learning work that I do is self-recorded, or whether or not it's actually having a client being able to kind of listen in and give feedback live, as long as I'm not concerned about my space or anything falling apart or the cat coming in or something like that, then it's all relatively kind of like straightforward. But yeah, it's I think now lots of people are going like, oh, I want to get into voiceover. Tell me how. It seems so easy for you, Chris.
Easy, ignoring all this experience and practice. That's
well, yes. I mean, it's true, but like a lot of things. I mean, I was told when I graduated, oh, you've got a very nice voice. That would do well for certain things. And then I wrote to every voiceover agent under the sun, because I thought that was the only way that you could get work. And so there are about 25 significant voiceover agencies based in London. And that was Tumbleweed. And then 6 months later, Tumbleweed. Did that process for 8 years, Tumbleweed, completely. It was only until I was actually kind of like booking work consistently on myself directly that, funnily enough, a couple of them approached me. So that's sod's law for you, essentially. But yeah, it's been a way of being able to treat it like a business and kind of like make those connections in a way. Thankfully, I've always been quite driven and in trying to get those kind of like opportunities and, collaborate with people and, just make connections for the sake of making connections and hope things kind of come my way. But it doesn't feel as if I'm kind of building on sand. Whereas with the acting thing, you feel as if you're only as good as your last gig, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot there. But one thing that struck me was obviously saying you got very little interest apart from your need to know about the technology and that kind of stuff. That hurt me in my soul. I was a sound tech student when I was at college.
I know. I was just like, I have no understanding of any of these things. It's like,
it was interesting because the one key message that we got drilled into us was, if you get it right, then it doesn't matter. That's the whole point of your job. No one should ever know about the technology or the sounds proofing of the room or the conditioning or anything like that, because they just go, yeah, that sounds great. That means you've done your job well. That's if someone can spot
I just
it.
trust other people have expertise and actual some degree of real knowledge and scientific knowledge about these things. I don't know. I mean, I do now. I have to have a rudimentary knowledge because I've been doing this too long not to be able to. So I can problem solve to a degree, and I can sort various things out. When someone tried to talk to me about standing waves or bass frequencies or anything else like that the first time, I just got into a nervous sweat because I was like, I just want to be focusing on the one thing.
Yeah.
And this is the other kind of like tricky thing. It's a bit like, a listener's or a reader's attention as well. It's like you can only focus on one thing at a time. Okay. So my focus is kind of like, I want everything. Sure, I'm happy to kind of like set everything up and focus on that. But when I'm recording, my focus has to be on the listener, real or imagined. I can't. Obviously, I need to be able to make sure I'm not popping the mic or, all of those kind of practicalities. But otherwise, I want to make sure that whoever is listening to my voice, that my attention is entirely on them and that their response is important to me in whatever rudimentary way, and whether or not that's me talking as someone leading them through a course, as a narrator, or as a character, or anything else like that. So I think to me it's just in terms of like dividing those attentions, because it's a bit like when I do kind of like theatre work. Yes, there is like 90% of my actor brain that is fully in the moment and, connecting to whoever else is on the stage with me and what the audience are doing. And then there's 10% of my brain kind of going like, your light is there, so you need to move there because otherwise you're going to be in the shadow, or don't bump into the furniture, or, make sure that you're wearing your trousers, all of these things, which are important. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's that getting your setup to get out of the way. That's always, I think, the sign of a good setup is when you just walk in and go tap tap tap, let's go.
Yes.
That's certainly what I've tried to create in the office, and it hasn't really worked yet, but we'll get there one day.
We'll get there. It's a journey.
Exactly. It just seems to change.
It's been a journey for this. For this, I'm in a room now, a padded cell, so there doesn't seem to be that much that could go wrong in this space. Although I've got backup parts for everything else, but it's been a journey to get here.
Absolutely. So, I kind of want to tighten in on the world of learning. Which of course where I am now and where we generally speak. But I think voiceover in the world of e-learning and generally in the learning world has gone through a bit of a journey over that. Certainly in my sort of almost a decade in the field now, I've seen it go from why on earth would you hire a voiceover artist? Do they even do learning? Aren't we a bit low budget for this kind of thing? To the world now where the idea of completing a large project without some kind of voiceover artist involved is kind of like that's a weird project. And I wonder kind of how that's looked for you. Have you seen kind of like a big spike recently, or has there been a big change? And how is the kind of content itself starting to change?
Okay, so I mean, I can obviously only speak from my own perspective. I do work for a few companies, kind of like permanently, kind of on retainers, essentially for e-learning stuff that they do. I would say there was definitely an explosion during the COVID area, obviously, because everybody was trying to pivot and put their resources into how do we make this? I don't know. How is this working? I have no idea. So a lot of that was actually kind of having to guide people through the process of, well, these are options that you could be. And this is what we can do, and it's absolutely fine, and be reassuring and do a lot of hand holding and that kind of thing. But that's okay. I would say in terms of the things themselves, I think there's a lot more character work that I do now. So there's a lot more kind of like real life kind of characters that I would do. So in terms of like first person testimony situations, that also sometimes comes hand in hand with people are starting to use things like augmented reality now. As part of their training stuff. So therefore a lot more kind of traditional kind of like character voices need to be kind of like used in the same way. So that's been quite good, but there's still also that kind of demand for a narrational voice that can guide through, there's a bit more of a kind of, rather than it just being an authoritarian voice saying, this is what you should do, and this is what you need to do here, and then you do this. Have you got it? Let's go through an ABC. Yeah, okay. So yeah, there's an element of that as well. But I think the more authentic, conversational, these are the words that come up all of the time. They're kind of like the bane of a voice actor's existence, because could you just be a bit more real, or a bit like, oh, it's just like you're in a pub, and it's like, what, after 5 pints? You don't want that person teaching you a course after 5 pints. I will be slurring. It's not a good thing. But that kind of light, conversational, people learn from people. People buy into other people's ideas. So the more that you can come across as an equal, albeit an authoritative equal in some kind of way, that seems to be the main thing, rather than it being like, you do this and then you do this and then you do this and blah blah blah, and I don't really care what you say, you understanding it in any way, shape or form, if that makes sense. There's been that kind of like shift over the last 4 or 5 years, but I don't know what about from your perspective, from your experiences with it? Have you seen a similar kind of like shift? Or
Yeah, definitely. I've seen certainly more organizations willing to not have super formal corporate language used when sort of communicating with people, which is nice, because it's horrible to write, to be honest. We all feel a bit stupid.
Not how people talk.
Exactly. And especially, again, I think the other thing is that I'm seeing a greater willingness to apportion budget to production value. Having spent the first, I would say, half of my time in the world of L&D fighting for any budget for anything, and if there was going to be audio recorded, it was going to be find a quiet space in the office and get a good mobile phone out. And everyone would kind of just go, oh well, it's only e-learning. And you're like, but this is our job. This is what we do for a living. How can you all care so little about the quality?
It's not just a glorified PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. It's why whenever anyone sort of says, no, e-learning's just kind of like PowerPoint on steroids, I want to scream. It's like, no, that's bad e-learning. That's really bad e-learning, is like PowerPoint on steroids. But I think as we've seen the realization of production value does impact how this is picked up and how it's retained, and the kind of acceptance that video, great tool, podcast, great tool, animation, great tool, all of those require a higher level of production value, otherwise they fall flat. Interestingly, I think it still stands the old thing about video. People care far more about the audio than they do the visual. You can get away with some
massively true.
Yeah, you can get away with some properly
I found
dodgy
the same
visuals.
thing. I found the same thing. I thought obviously kind of like, well, if I'm going to start a YouTube channel and it's in any way related to voiceover, then the audio possibly should be good. But it's only actually when you do your research and you start properly listening with proper cans and going like, oh my God, this is horrible. I would never actually, kind of watch this. And it's purely just because of the audio, and it's filmed in 4K and it's cost a fortune, but they've just gone on, it's an afterthought. It's crazy.
I couldn't agree more. I think even it's kind of I spent a lot of time in video, and it's the one lesson that you never stop relearning, is that actually, yes, you can spend a lot of time setting up the frame and you can get it right, but none of that will matter if you listen to it back at the editing bay and go, well, the audio's rubbish. That's this take ruined. Get rid of it. There's just no point. I'd much rather have a less ideal shot. Because I think as well, it's easier to manipulate video. It's easier to redo the visuals. Recapturing genuinely live captured human audio, you never get it again. If you try and re-record a conversation in a booth over the video, it can be done. We all know it can. It's done very well in some films, but they've got the budget and the time and all this to do it.
Exactly.
If they take
it's always a balancing act with those resources.
Exactly. I can't afford 103 takes to get a conversation right. I'm done first or second time, really. It's
and I think that's the understanding as well that we as voiceover artists have to have in terms of that level of expediency. For me, I'm always kind of like, the first thing that I ask, and sometimes a lot of people are kind of like, why are you asking that question? What do you want to know about our company? But it's like, what's your workflow? And I don't mean like go from the ground up, but if I have an understanding of in what order it's coming, and quite often, yes, obviously the voiceover is one of the last things. You get everything right, and then like the bloody voiceover into it, and it just kind of works then, right? Hopefully. And then you realize all of the timings are wrong because no one can speak at that speed and do the animations at your speed. So maybe we need to have a conversation about that. The other thing is that it's actually, ironically, it's quite a similar conversation that I actually have with a lot of indie game devs, which is that it's like, first of all, yes, voiceover can be expensive. It can definitely be expensive, depending on who you're talking to and what the level of the project is and all of these kind of things. But a lot of voiceover artists are more than happy to have conversations at the beginning to really have a full understanding about these things so that we can actually save you money in the long term by adapting to your workflow as much as possible. Whether or not that's kind of like, well, what I can do is I can give you a quick guide track so you've got something to work from. And when everything is finalized, then I can come in with the final narration and you'll have an idea about what it is that I'm doing, and that doesn't cost you anything extra, depending on your workflow and how you want to work or anything else, like, then absolutely fine. Or if you want me to voice to picture, then I have the facility to voice to picture for it, and I can trial a bit with you there, or you can listen in if you want to, or if you just want it all done, then that's absolutely fine. It's just kind of like being mindful of how different people's priorities are going to work. Because I know for some people, they're not going to, they're only going to be able to listen to the audio once. And I know that they're going to be like, kind of, I just need all of this to go in and work immediately because I ain't got any more time. And that's absolutely fine, because that means I kind of have to focus on certain things, and it means that I'm going to be more like, if I see an issue in terms of the copy, what I do is I give an A, B, and C, where I kind of go like, I think you mean this, it's written like this, but there's also this kind of version, so that you could then kind of cut it and edit it immediately in the thing, and you've got one of those three will be right.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a bit more of a to and a fro thing, I might go like, okay, we've got this issue with a copy. Is there a best way of rewording it? Can we go backwards and forth, try a few different things? Because ultimately I want to make sure I don't sound so good if the syntax and the language isn't quite on point. You can be a good actor, and so you can, but we're trying to, as you say, kind of guide away from that corporate speak into making things as understandable and as engaging as kind of as possible. So when you are focusing on that communication, I think it's really important that therefore you think about the language that you use. And so therefore the fact that, I've gone on copyright courses as well as voiceover courses, because what I want my value proposition to be is not just like, I've got a nice sounding voice. Well, there are thousands of people. I'm sure Kevin from accounts has a nice sounding voice, or Stacey in reception. She probably has a great voice. It has to be more than that. Regardless of whether or not it's multi-character or anything. But in terms of, the emotional investment and all of those kind of things, or even knowing how to subtly use a microphone, because that will massively kind of like vary from project and project as well. So it's just having that kind of like two-way kind of dialogue thing, but appreciation of what the other person's wants, because it has such a wide kind of like span. But going back to what I was saying about with the game devs as well, it's that kind of like buy-in from early on. If we can, for some people, they may be really open to that collaboration, especially in an early stage where they haven't worked with voiceover much. And the fact is that we're not all just guns for hire and arguing about, how many pence per word we need to, we insist we need to charge or whatever. Some of it's kind of like, well, let's make sure it's good. Because if it's good, you'll probably want to work with me again. And if you want to work with me again, you might recommend me to other people that you know as well. So it's kind of win-win to me if I just make sure that the process, which I know is quite often stressful, to put it all together in the production side, goes as seamlessly as possible with that. So it's managing lots of different things, for sure.
Yes, I think that it touched on some really interesting things there, especially in terms of like how we work with voiceover artists. Because I think you're right. Very often it is, certainly in my experience, it's seen as well, if we've got time at the end, we'll bring in someone and they'll quickly just record this, and it's not important, so we'll slap it on.
And that's fine.
Yeah,
I mean, that's fine in terms of like your product will suffer.
Yes,
but sure, yeah, but I understand, and I created that video about AI voiceover.
Yes,
artificial intelligence voiceover and stuff like that, and I think there's a kind of like this will again be part of the conversation because AI voice to an extent may solve some of the cost problem, certainly in e-learning or in certain areas, possibly. My not argument for or against it is that, I mean, it also creates a lot of issues because how an algorithm will know what to place emphasis on and how to build thoughts, because it's not actually going through a cognitive process. You're literally having to set, at the moment, even if it does it seamlessly, you're going like, hit this word, up pitch here, go from, authoritative to happy or sad, there's a certain number of gear shifts, and that's what you're going to get. And if you put in the same code, you'll get exactly the same result every time. So if you're offering something like an AI voice like that at scale, it's only going to do the same number of things over time. So it's still it's still a solution, and it's kind of like, I think it's going to be part of the testing in terms of is a good AI voice still better than no AI? Like now, I would say still, if you've got like a Siri equivalent, it's like, no, I'd say cut it. No, don't touch it with a barge pole yet. Because everybody just goes, oh, this is funny. Oh, what am I watching a TikTok? Oh, TTS, that's hilarious. And completely stop taking you seriously. And and then you lose contracts and it's all terrible and you lose your house. But, kind of like, we'll get to a point in a surprisingly few number of years where there will be an acceptable alternative, I'm sure. The way that I want to try and kind of obviously secure my house, and my job and my worth is being able to still kind of go like, well, yes, but what's the value that I can add? And if that's earlier engagement in the workflow or appreciation of what your workflow is, or if it's literally just in terms of the understanding and using, all of my, actors toolkit just to make whatever it is that I'm working on as effective as possible. And then an appreciation that I know that for some of those clients, that'll be really worthwhile and worth that level of investment as it is now. And for others, they'll go like, yeah, it would be nice, but we don't have the budget. So I think it's part of that kind of like conversation, most certainly. But like your point with, audio generally, if if it's like something grating and someone's listening to it all the time, I think as soon as certainly I'm with it right now. It's like as soon as I know it's an AI voice, even if I know it's a good AI voice at the moment, there's a certain level of disengagement for me because I'm not interacting with it in the same way. I know it's not a real person, and that's odd. But give us a few years and we'll all be desensitized to it.
Yes, well, I suppose that is a slight concern in many ways. But it's interesting because recently I've been discussing a lot about the fact that in the animated content that I work with, we use a lot of humour. Specifically, a lot of quite kind of what often gets described as British humour, sarcasm, dry wit, those kinds of things.
I have no idea what you mean.
No, of course not. Yeah. But it's the kind of thing that it lives or dies by the vocal delivery. Yeah. One beat off, the pace, the emphasis, anything, it loses, it just becomes words. But when it's hit perfectly, it goes from to hilarious. And to me, that is where kind of the classic at the minute is people using the default text-to-speech one inside Storyline, the authoring tool. And you listen to it and just go, why would you subject someone to listening to this? It's like the original version of Siri, not even the current. It's kind of that first beta release version. Always reminds me of the woman that does the announcements at the train station, where she's just recorded all the words and they just cut them together.
And she's like, I don't care. As long as they get the information clearly, I don't care.
Exactly. And at a train station, that's fine. Workplace learning content, probably not the same as the train station. As it turns out.
And it's completely true in terms of things like humor or anything with any degree of spontaneity or emotion behind it. It's kind of like, okay, so in order to craft that in a believable way, if it is an AI voice, it means someone has to take the time to go like, So is it 0.5 of a second of a beat before he comes in with the other thing? And then but then we've got to tune that inflection. And because it's been so manufactured, you will spend 10 times the time to craft that properly rather than get some performers who know exactly what they're doing. And they can spontaneously do it in about 3 or 4 different ways.
Yeah.
And they'll all work. It's just one will work a bit better and you'll use that and that's fine. So in terms of expediency, it could actually cause a lot of problems.
Definitely.
I would say. So I think it's only people will only test by doing. Someone will do the numbers at a various stage and go like, we cannot afford a live human voice except for someone who is willing to record it in their iPhone, using their iPhone in a bathroom. So it's probably not going to necessarily sound that great. Or we've got Steve the AI program who is, shall we say, very consistent in his delivery, but might need some direction.
Yes.
Let's see how far this goes.
Yeah.
And it'll only be from kind of like the feedback. So yeah, I mean, I'm just keen on kind of keeping that conversation open because at the same time, I think there's something to be said about like, if you can be in a piece of learning where the program immediately recognizes you where you are and calls you by a certain name and has a degree of personalization that AI can give you, then that potentially can affect the learner in a positive, more engaging way. Which is the next kind of level of content. So there's also this argument about like, could there be a hybrid of like the majority of the course is actually done by a real life person, but there are elements of it, some of the variables, where you can take these opportunities for personalization and go, where would this really add value? And it's like, okay, well, if we're saying just their name or where they're from or what their occupation is or referencing one of their positions in the past, that could have suddenly a kind of a bigger emotional relevance, but then still the majority of the performance is carried by a human performer who knows what they're doing and you don't have to, micromanage everything else. Well, that could be even more value. And so that without wanting to kind of embrace the technology, embrace my own kind of like demise too eagerly, that's why I'm kind of open to having conversations with, AI voice kind of development companies, because I think there are some opportunities there which could be great. Or, you change, a certain name or something in a 50,000 word piece is changed. So your man here has to kind of go through each one and make sure that the tone is exactly the same for each one. It's completely spontaneous, even though that I recorded it all 4 months ago when I had a slight cold. That is, I mean, yeah, we charge for that, but it's a nightmare. And in all honesty, it's not something, I mean, it's fine. It's part of the job, but it's kind of like, again, if there's an AI algorithm that could make you go like, okay, that's all done, then that makes both our lives so much easier. Yeah. And if I maybe there's a nominal fee because I own the IP AI rights to my voice. So it's like, oh yeah, to put it through my AI program, it's X amount. It'd still be a fraction of what it would be to manually do it because that's not got anything to do with creativity. That's continuity, and that's a whole other practical issue.
No, I think it's really refreshing to hear that point of view, because I think so often in all industries, it's no one industry that's guilty of it. The next wave of technology that kind of threatens to change how everything is done is usually resisted to the nth degree. Yep. But I feel like actually everyone would have an easier journey of it if everyone went, well, look, it can't be all bad, otherwise no one would be making it.
Well, I mean, it's that. I mean, it is what it is. So it's kind of like you make the best out of it. I mean, it's because I personally have benefited from the last revolution in my industry, in terms of this whole home studio thing being a viable thing and not just something like, sorry, what? You want to record it at home? So, sorry, what? But be like, oh yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. And it's kind of like proof of concept. Has been the last kind of 10 years. But there were those people, those voice actors who had never gone like, who would never want to take the responsibility of like, what is the microphone? How do I set this up? How do I sound treat myself? How do I know how to do, audio editing and all of this kind of stuff? They're just kind of like, I have no capacity or willingness for this, and so I can't do it. I literally want to drive to a studio, be handed a bunch of scripts, have my cigarette and my cup of coffee, and then go, and then it's off, and then that's literally it. And essentially, there's the top half percentile of the industry who possibly still work, in that way. I mean, they're the household names who are brought in. But for the vast majority of other voice actors who want to take it seriously as a full-time profession, you just do have to have a home studio now. It's just a level of expectation to it because, I'm working with whether it's game developers, whether or not it's, instructional designers, whether or not it's kind of like startups, all of them. The value that I offer them is being able to go like, you don't need to hire a studio for me or any of those kind of costs. And I'm able to do it absolutely immediately. I don't need to book time in with any of other kind of like voice actors as well. So I've made that huge advent in technology my advantage. But at the same time, whilst everybody was championing the victory of the home studio when this was all happening, I was kind of like, reminded about there will always be something else. And I think as soon as the video that I referenced in my video about the AI voice that could cry, and it didn't sound like a robot. It was like, oh, that sounds like some half decent acting, to be honest. Damn. And then you kind of like caveat of like, yeah, if you whack a great big sentimental score underneath it, it'll probably sound okay anyway. And yeah, it's for a minute-long trailer that they've spent months building, moment by moment by moment. Yeah. So it's still very artificial in terms of the threat. But to acknowledge it, but then go like, so a bit like being able to have my microphone in my studio here and all of this kind of thing. What could this technology, how could this enable me to be better as a voiceover artist? First of all, in terms of being, I think it pushes me in two ways. First of all, it means that I need to kind of be even more sure in terms of my offering as a performer and all of those skills and being very clear about what it is that I offer, and also just being kind of like very clear about how there will be different kind of elements to business that will continue to kind of like change, and there'll be different kind of customer needs and pain points as a result, and I will need to shape my business to adjust that. So if that means that there's kind of like a different group of clients that I end up getting who mainly deal with an AI version of my voice because, at the end of the day, they feel like the voiceover is a bonus, but they'd rather have a voice than no voice, then fair enough, fine, and I can manage that. But it also means that potentially, if there is an algorithm that does corrections like this, then I'd get into audiobooks much, much quicker. Because, I mean, as an example, bizarrely, audiobooks, unless you're a household name, are ridiculously badly paid. Like disproportionately badly paid from everything else. It's just one of those things. Oh, it's always been like this. And you go like, yeah, but why though? I mean, obviously there's a commercial element to it. So it depends. But if you're not Stephen Fry, if you're not that household name, then it's a lot of work. So the people who are audiobook narrators I have the most respect for because they're brilliant, but they're also disciplined because they've really got to put the hours in. That whole thing about vocal stamina, like narrating for 2, 3, 4 hours a day, and then doing the editing or outsourcing the editing and having to do the pickups and all of those kind of things. But if there's an algorithm that deals with the pickups for me, then I'm like, okay, well maybe we can talk. Because that's the thing that puts me off, is that it's like, oh, well, okay, on balance, yes, I could outsource it to an editor or I could do the editing myself, but risk rewards, it's not quite enough for me. But, in the future, who's to say, with something like that. So I think it's just kind of trying to keep an open mind, trying to, as much as the impulse is to go like, oh, my God, the machines are coming, to think like, okay, well, yes, they are, but how can we embrace that?
Awesome. No, I think that's a great mindset to have. One thing I was quite interested in asking actually is in terms of sort of receiving scripts. I would assume you probably see many different formats and ways of sending you stuff for recording.
Yes, I do.
And
some are very interesting.
Like
literally off the back of a fag packet sometimes.
Okay, yeah. I would hope we're not doing e-learning quite that badly anywhere in the industry at this point. But I am quite interested because I everyone has challenges with different projects, and I think what is the kind of, I don't know, best, most effective or gold standard kind of way of formatting or sending over content that you want recorded?
Everyone will have something different, so I can only speak for myself. I think the biggest thing is something that I can edit or annotate as a way, because I mark up my scripts quite a bit. Some people don't quite so much, and it'll depend on the script and everything else like that. But what I do is, because I want to annotate certain things anyway, so line spacing is big for me. Like a minimum of 1.2 to 1.4 in terms of line spacing means there's just enough space in between the words so that I can make annotations and all of this kind of thing. But by the same token, it's not so spaced out that, you know, if a sentence is running on, that there's a kind of mini pause because my eyes have to move from one bit of the page to the other. So that's a kind of a balancing act in many kind of like ways. But being able to annotate it is good. Obviously, paragraphs spacing in relation to the various different beats, you know, that's always kind of like helpful. If there are any kind of like major directions that need to be, you know, intuited, then that's always really useful as well. Kind of any kind of stage directions, or, you know, at this stage the cursor is going to go over to there, because sometimes it's quite nice to be able to slightly suspend a thing, you know, as they find, okay, so they've said it's in the top right hand corner, okay, fine, so that there's not like that beat of silence whilst they find the thing, so it's kind of still connecting the dots. So that I find is really kind of like useful, but mainly it's just having a document that we can kind of like adapt in some way. So if someone sends me a PDF, I know PDFs are great, but I'm like, oh my god, now. Because I can annotate them, yes, but I can't adapt the spacing and things to my personal preferences. And it'll be the difference between, like, when I'm sitting down, I use the screen in front of me, but if I'm standing up, which I do for the vast majority of my narration, then it's on a smaller screen on an iPad where I'm kind of annotating things. So just anything that I can adjust. And also just those kind of like little heads up of like, if there's a significant thing, if there's a moment that you want to work in conjunction with the animation or with a sound cue or anything else like that, then that just gives us a level of heightened awareness. Yeah.
That's true. Well, there we go. For those who follow the channel, that's another reason PDFs are the worst file format out there.
I'm afraid they are.
They are awful. I've got a whole video about the problem with PDFs on this channel. It's I'm tired of seeing them. It's time for them to go away from a learning perspective.
I'm sorry I brought that up for you, Tom.
That's all right. If you've got a legal document and you need someone to sign it, they're fantastic. But other than that, leave your PDFs alone. So this is another good reason. But that's really interesting, because so often I think certainly I've spent a lot of time going, should there be grids and should there be this? But actually things like line spacing wouldn't have even occurred to me.
To me, that's the main thing. It's kind of like, as long as it's clear by a paragraph break or anything else like that, you know, when one section ends and another one begins, then that's all fine. You know, you can number it or not number it, but, you know, other than that, it's just making them adaptable, because you don't know. There's some people who are dyslexic, there are some people who are short or long-sighted. There are all of these different adjustments that people kind of go through. So everybody will want something slightly different. I know someone who needs to color every one of their scripts green, and if it's sent to them, they're just like, I literally can't do anything about that. You know, they've got their piece of, you know, green thing that they can kind of like mount on most scripts and it'll do, but it's not ideal. So yeah, I think just having a document that is adaptable is always a bonus. I know sometimes it's impossible because of workflows, etc., but it can really help.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's something that I think we can, part of thinking about that workflow implication. It's good to kind of know if we can make that as smooth as possible. So I think that's a lot of the hesitation when I work with people is, we haven't worked with this before, or how do we format documents? It's those little stumbling blocks, and the easier it can be, the more we can get sort of things going in the right
and
direction.
I think all kind of, we're all about shorthands and expediency generally as well. If there are like previous existing examples of tones or things that you particularly like, or an example of our work that made you decide to book us, then it's kind of like, use them, point to those things and say, this is the things that we like and these are the things that we're aiming for, because then that immediately puts us on the same page, rather than being kind of like, I'm still not 100% sure where you're going and there needs to be backwards and forwards, that kind of stuff.
We're rapidly running out of time. And there's a question that I kind of must ask this question.
Okay.
Because it's always really interested me. Back from watching performers in booths, back when you used to when you did have to go to studios. That was when the home studios rose. My idea of work in a recording studio died a death.
I'm sorry.
Your
there are
fault.
still some very, very good studios out there. Don't get me wrong, but it's tough for some of them.
Yeah. And they only employ really good people, which meant Tom goes to e-learning, and that was that. How when you get a script through and you get a brief, whether it's e-learning or whether it's something else, and there's some kind of character involved, what does that process look like? What does it involve for you? And I realize it will be different for everyone that does it, right?
I mean, it's all so acting fundamentals 101 that I was kind of referenced right at the beginning. Who am I? Who am I talking to? What's my objective? What's my objective is kind of like the big thing. So who am I trying, what am I trying to get someone, the audience, to kind of say? That's the kind of key message. And then you're going to be thinking about various tactics or states. So how emotional are they? Generally, your speaker is either going to be mad, sad, or glad. Those are the kind of like three areas. And then it's kind of like, well, everyone's going to be in a ballpark between those three. So make a quick choice just to know which ballpark that you kind of like operate in. And then you kind of go from there. And then it's to do with tactics. So whether or not, whether or not that's about you're trying to persuade someone, whether you're trying to order someone, whether or not you're trying to attract someone, or seduce someone in any kind of way, shape, or form. I think as soon as you've got a sense of, where the dynamic is in between, that's the main thing. And then you kind of like focus on how close to me is it? Is my voice the best voice to kind of suit this, or does it require some form of characterization? And if it does require some form of characterization, then there's kind of like a checklist that I use in terms of, how am I going to change my voice? Am I going to, increase the nasality of it? Am I going to change the rhythms of it particularly? Is that what we need? If there's a particularly kind of like a nervous character, then they're going to operate on certain kind of rhythmically in a very different way. They're going to be a much more stop and starty, much more kind of like dithery. So seeing opportunities in the script to action, that is the main thing. So I think it's kind of, you go down to the, very, very kind of textbook, what's my motivation, darling? Your motivation is to get to the end of the script and record it as soon as possible and send it back. That's your motivation. And not hit the mic is your motivation. But beyond that, kind of like, what is it that you're really trying to get out of them is the main kind of thing. And so that's the inward focus. And then the outward focus is kind of like, is there any external? Is there any kind of like metaphorical costume that I need to put on my voice in order to be credible as this character? Or is it fine to be just me? And even if it is just me, I haven't come up with this script, so it's me with a bit of a twist, because I need to be apparently quite articulate on this subject, apparently. So there's always got to be that kind of leap. So that's a kind of little checklist that we go through, and then from that, I'll always try and record a short kind of like demo first and foremost, just so because obviously sometimes you're recording very, very large projects. So yeah, just make sure if there are any big projects, I don't just record the beginning, because the beginning is obviously an introductory voice quite often. And so therefore, when you're introducing lots of ideas, sometimes you'll go a bit slower and you'll be spelling things out more. But if you're going through that for 3 to 5 hours, this is a guaranteed way to make people fall asleep very, very soon. It may be very soothing, but I'm not working for the car map right now. So what I also do is then I try and scan the whole document and see, are there any extremes? Are there any high energy extremes and any low energy extremes? And so therefore, if I've got like a demo which covers that arc, then you can approve like this is where I'm going to start. This is kind of where I'm going to go, and this is where I'm going to end. Does that sound okay? And I think that's always a better thing rather than okaying a tone, and then it's only when you're 3 hours through it going like, it's a bit monotonous. It's a bit all at the same level, which is the thing that we want to get away from. Is that we want without forcing it, we want the tone to be real and alive and conversational in some kind of like way. So there has to be a certain level of dynamism to the voice. So that would be my kind of like priority.
Awesome. It's interesting that you mentioned bringing it to life at the end. That's a phrase that has been sitting in the learning world for as long as I can remember, is we need to bring learning to life. So it's funny how there's that similarity to it. But
yeah, but I mean, how do you bring things to life? I mean, fundamentally, it's a triggering on people's emotional responses. People need to be invested in those kind of things. So it's a very practical way into it. It's not all mystical.
No, absolutely. And I think that's the interesting thing about this is so often, I think you're right, it almost, and it's the same in every industry, so that element of it gets handed away. Oh, it's the creative stuff. We'll hand that to the creatives. You think actually that it's not that soft stuff that people tend to attach to that word. There is process and there's thought and there's usually a great deal of both involved in all that creative stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. And it needs to be a two-way. It needs to be a dialogue. It needs to be a dialogue between those things. If it's just in isolation, then you're kind of on a hiding to nothing. It'll be a bit half-baked.
Absolutely. Well, look, we've got easily swept through an hour without even thinking about it. So we'll bring it to a close. But I think it is an area where we're just it's gonna be more and more in the industry. And I know obviously you've got your YouTube channel, which I started checking out some videos on, and it's really interesting to get an insight. Because I don't know too many other voiceover artists who do just kind of do videos about voiceover.
Essentially I'm trying to demystify a little bit as well as kind of consolidate some of my own kind of thing, but try and explain my own processes to demystify really a little bit. Because I think there's a lot of kind of assumption about what each other's kind of problems and issues and tasks generally are. I think the sooner, like just having this conversation with you in terms of kind of clarifying certain things, it's like, oh, okay, well that can make the job so much easier or so much more straightforward. As well as hopefully just kind of. I don't exactly have a T-shirt with voice actors of people too on it, but hopefully it kind of like takes us off that kind of weird, they just talk to themselves all day kind of association. We just kind of unpack a bit of variety there as well.
Absolutely. So following this, if people want to, and if you want them to, where can people get hold of you or speak to you?
So my website is naturallyrp.co.uk. So that is naturally RP is for received pronunciation. So that's that's my accent. That's what I've gone with. I do have my website, which is just under my name, Christopher Tester, as well, and they're kind of linked, but that's more for my acting stuff. So hence the split, but not the split in personality. So I'm active on there, and from there is various kind of social media. Essentially, if you want to see more of my cat. I have a studio cat called Honey. Then get on my Instagram. There is regular cat content there because she's managed to be able to. I've taught her to be able to kind of sit on my lap whilst I'm recording and not make a susceptible sound, which has taken a lot of energy and practice. Very kind of Zen master, kind of Karate Kid type stuff going on here. So she kind of keeps me sane. So that's all I could offer people right now. Sorry.
Awesome. No, that's brilliant, and the YouTube channel as well.
Yes, So that's just naturally RP voiceover, I think. Yes.
And we'll have links to all of that below so people can check out that content because it was really interesting. Especially, I say, watching the AI one, the video editing was fun as well. Anything that can get some nice Terminator clips in there, that's a good day.
That was my priority.
Absolutely. How can I get this in? AI. Yes. That's the one.
Easy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time out on a Monday, no less, to to come and have a chat. And thank you to everyone tuning in and joining us. Hopefully, you found this useful or funny, or you at least burnt an hour of your time. Please do come back and check out more episodes in the future. Remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.